I'm Diane Flock. I'm the administrator for the Arts and Culture Collaborative for the Waterbury Region, and we are one of the partners hosting today's forum to allow you to hear from our local legislators on the importance of the arts. The Arts and Culture Collaborative covers 16 towns in the greater Waterbury region and Naugatuck Valley. We've been in existence 16 years, and we have 4 basic pillars of service, which are to promote, connect, collaborate, and advocate for the arts. And part of what we're doing today is advocating for the arts, educating our legislators, hearing from them, and inspiring support for the arts. I'd like to turn it over to Steph Burr, my counterpart from Northwest Arts Council, for an introduction.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today and taking the time to show that you care about the arts. It's something that we all care about very much over here at the Arts Council. We serve 25 towns around Litchfield County, and we're a 19-year-old organization, very happy to be here doing this advocacy work today. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you all have to say. And thank you, Diane, so much for putting this all together.
Thank you. I'm just going to briefly tell you who the candidates are with us today. In the 32nd Senate District is Jeff Desmarais. From the 76th House District is John Piscopo. From the 66th District is candidate Matt Dyer. From the 65th House District is Michelle Cook. And from the 73rd District is Ron Napoli. And we do expect from the 75th District, Geraldo Reyes. 2 others were supposed to join us. Eric Berthel, he's busy getting a Legislator of the Year award. Imagine that. That's more important than here. But we congratulate him on his award, and he may try to zoom in if time allows. And Senator George Cabrera was planning to be with us, but he again had an emergency and couldn't be with us. So I'm going to turn it now over to our moderator, Ann Caroli.
Oh, thanks.
Managing editor of the Republican American, and she will be fielding the questions. And each candidate will have up to 90 seconds to answer each question. So if you go too long, we will stop you. So we'll get started. And
well, thank you very much. That's very nice. And let me tell you, she's going to be watching the clock, so you better be careful. And we're going to make this, pretty relaxed and kind of free flowing. So as I ask the questions, if you guys we're not going to pick a set order, just, raise your hand and jump right in and we'll get going. So,
okay, I'm going to move off screen and watch the clock. Yeah. Thank you.
You don't want to mess with the clock watcher, everybody. She's tough. I hear she's tough. So, thank you, everybody. Thank you for spending the time and for being willing to be out here today. Today, I feel like as we get started, I feel like I really need to just say 2 things. Let's just take a second and all send some good thoughts to Bristol. I spent my morning dealing with the very sad news of 2 officers killed in the line of duty in Bristol and another shot and in the hospital. It's really quite a tragedy. And just let's all send some really good thoughts out to that community, because that could be any one of our police departments in any one of our towns. So let's send positive energy to Bristol. I also feel compelled today, just because of the context, to let's just take a minute and stop and send some sympathies to the family of Joe Galbraith and the Galbraith family. In the context of the arts community, Marie Galbraith's funeral services are today. Her husband, Joe, worked at the Republican American for many, many, many decades. And as some of you may know, Marie was very active in the arts community at the Mattatuck, at the Thomaston Opera House. and in fact, spent some time in Hartford. So it seems appropriate as we settle down to talk about the arts in Connecticut to stop and remember this wonderful woman who really did care so much about the arts community and about Northwest Connecticut. So sympathies to the Galbraith family. So what do you think? Are you guys ready? Are you ready to get started? Got some thumbs up, that's good. Let's get right to it. Everybody is here today. You guys are all here today because you want to speak to voters who care about the arts and are interested in the arts. So let's start with the premise that supporting something is easier if you understand it or if you've experienced it. Please tell us specifically when and where you last participated in a show, a program, a concert, any of our region's varied offerings in the arts. Who'd like to jump in first?
I'll jump in. I was at the Warner on Sunday night.
Oh, Warner on Sunday night. What'd you do at the Warner?
Oh, Trace Atkins was playing at the Warner on Sunday night. So I was seeing that show. And then a few days before that, I was at 5 Points on University Drive.
Wow. How did you enjoy those? Did they have you thinking about the offerings up there in Torrington?
I think we have great offerings up here in Torrington. I'm happy to work with Steph and all of the other folks. You know, so much so that I sit on the Friendly Hands Food Bank board, and this is our second annual chair auction, and we, you know, enlist local artists from around the region to paint chairs, and then we auction them off for the good of the food bank. So we're all, you know, so we're able to showcase our artists and then give back. So
that's interesting. Art meets charity. That's a nice extension.
Absolutely.
How about anybody else?
I'm not sure if it exactly counts in the same category, but I count it in the same category. But back in March, I was at the Watertown High School performance of Mamma Mia. I had a bit of a bias in it because my daughter was in the play. So I was doing, I think they did 6 performances and I was at 4 or 5 of them. It was a really terrific show. And I would count that as being parts of the entire art scene here in Northwest Connecticut. And as far as I'm concerned anyway, it was a great show.
I'm guessing you have your pick for your favorite artist of the show, right?
Yeah, she was, you know, it's funny that she was a dancer and now she's going to have a speaking part in the fall production. So I'm looking forward to that. So I'll be there too.
Oh, good. That's nice. Who else has been out and about?
I'll chime in. I saw the Thompson Opera House has a youth program, and they did Les Miserables, and it was just phenomenal. Every voice was just unbelievable. It rivaled a lot of adult shows that I've seen, you know, with the production quality and everything. So it was quite a event. Been to a couple of the music festivals up in Goshen. I missed Black Bear just recently, but I went last year. I think I saw Matt there, and Falcon Ridge earlier this year up there. And so, a couple of music festivals are a lot of fun to go to too. And I'm bringing Mom to the show, The Addams Family, next week. My 90-year-old mom and I are going to check out The Addams Family in the Thompson Opera House next, I think, Friday.
That's an interesting mix.
Eclectic.
Yeah, that's funny. Who else? Did anybody else want to talk about your recent nights out?
Hi, Annie. I'll jump in here.
Hi, how are you?
Napoli. Good. How are you? So my wife and I were in a lottery for 2 years to see Hamilton on Broadway in New York. And we had the worst seats in the house. We were right up against the back wall, but it was fascinating.
That's funny. Did she? So are you compelled now? Maybe you should go to a show in Waterbury or Torrington and see if you can get better seats.
Yeah, we've been to the Palace before. And, you know, there's in the Palace, there's not a bad seat in the house. So we love going there.
My problem with the Palace is I just want to look around at the theater when I'm in there. All right, anybody else? Anybody else want to talk?
Absolutely, I can round this off. I went again to the Black Bear Festival this weekend. John, this year I went again because I love it. So that's a fascinating way to try to get different types of music up here. I was at the Warner Theater several months ago for dance, one of the statewide dance contests. I have a good friend of mine whose daughter is in dance. And so we were there to root her on and make sure that the dance went well. They then went to nationals down in, I think, Myrtle Beach, if I'm not mistaken. And we are heading to the Irish group Alton in Norfolk at the Infinity Hall on October 22nd. We were jamming. Yeah, we were jamming with a band in Ireland in June. Yeah, music's a big part. This is not going out for music. But my son, who's currently in Seattle, he and I don't get to talk all the time. He just sent me a song that he had written and recorded via his GarageBand stuff. He sent that to me last week. So it's not going out for music, but I'll take it. It's close enough.
Well, that's kind of cool, actually. We'll have to hear that song.
Yeah. I may need his.
One thing I love about the arts in this region is, you know, our newspaper covers, you know, we go all the way up into Litchfield County, we go all the way down into the valley, you know, we're all through Greater Waterbury. And when it comes to news, people are often like, oh, that's their news. That's Torrington news. That's Waterbury news. We don't care about their news. We care about our news, you know, very provincial in news. But when it comes to the arts, I love how many people will just travel around and go around to different venues. They'll go to Thomaston, they'll go to Waterbury, they'll go up to the Warner, they'll go to Norfolk. You know, I think that's kind of cool. Well, thank you. That's good. I know that sounds like a lot of good date nights out there. You must have very happy families. So let's move on. We have in Connecticut a history of providing less funding to arts organizations than states that have county government or more regional fundraising perspectives. Florida and Massachusetts are examples we may be familiar with personally. Funding has also been flat. Since 2017, for example, the Palace, the Bushnell, the Schubert, and Stanford each have received the same direct state funding, $196,000 a year. Do you believe funding has been limited? Can you think of a different way to fund these groups? Or would you support another path for state funding for these arts organizations?
Well, Ann, I'd like to kind of go into that in terms of funding from kind of more than one perspective. We're talking about not just theaters, but as I was mentioning earlier regarding schools, my daughter's play that I had just been mentioning, the musical, they were so limited in funding. They had to raise money all constantly to try to get even just enough money to put the show on. And this is a problem in school district after school district after school district, where they have very limited funding for theatrical productions, for any other artistic venture. And, you know, from my point of view is that if we really are trying to promote the arts regionally, or statewide for that matter, the place to best do that is right there through our schools. So I do think that increasing funding in the schools for arts and for theater is really important. And how we do that, we can look at ways of doing it through through regional organizations that can help contribute to that. But also, I think there should be some responsibility on the legislative side to make sure that some of the money that we're earmarking towards schools through the ECS program, for example, a certain amount should be allocated towards arts and theatrical productions. There's a lot of money spent in schools on sports activities, and that's very important too, because we know athletic activity encourages teamwork and encourages exercise and physical activity. But our art and theatrical productions encourages self-expression, encourages kids to have confidence in themselves, to find their inner voice. And so I think it's really important for us to look at that as a major point where funding is required, and we should be looking to direct it that way.
So that's, that's a very interesting point about schools and arts funding. What about the actual organizations and the state of this legislative funding that's been flat and that they're saying they haven't gone up? Do you think there's a way to increase that? Do you think it should be increased? Do you
I
think
think
there's another?
yes, I definitely think it should be increased. I mean, the importance of art in our culture is paramount. We saw today the tragedy we saw on the news this morning regarding the police officers. I mean, there's a lot of dark, terrible things that are going on all over our world. Arts and culture brighten that. They give something joyful in life to look forward to. They give us something to aspire to. It. They give us some depth, whether it's music or visual arts or performing arts. And I think that we do, as a legislative body, we have a responsibility to make sure that we're contributing towards that promotion for our people, because with such difficult times that we've seen over the last, well, as long as you'd like to look back, art has been something that's been a light in a dark tunnel, and I think that it's a well-deserved allocation from our state funds to be able to encourage in organizations and theatrical groups to be able to promote sort of like the better side of life.
How about anybody else? Would any of our legislators who are on the ballot who have had to deal with these issues? Anybody want to jump in and have a say about our current state of funding?
I'll jump in real quick. And you're right, and about it being flat funded, and you mentioned a few of those examples. There's a lot that slipped under that funding, if you will. A lot of arts venues and that kind of those facilities that don't make that $197 or $196,000 line item. So and we worked hard to get the Warner into that. Michelle helped me out with that, and we worked hard to get the Warner into that line item. As far as increased funding, yes, it makes good sense. There was a really comprehensive report done by the Warner not too long ago, and the multiplier effect was almost hard to believe. What every penny invested into the arts brings back to the community, and it was well done. It was a good report, and so that's always got to be the forefront of your mind. We have expanded somewhat in the Department of Economic Development with other grant opportunities for the smaller theaters, as I referenced earlier, that are maybe slipping under the vision of arts and humanity funding. And that is like a good to great grant, or some of the other grants that are available. And just recently, there was a lot of federal money that came in, and that kept our venues alive. Thank you.
Well, I was going to say, hold on to both of those thoughts because we may come back to those issues. Who else would like to talk about the state funding?
I'd like to jump in if I could. This is State Representative Geraldo Reyes from Waterbury. How are you?
How are you? Welcome.
Good, thank you. And I apologize for being a few minutes late. I did catch Mr. Desmarais' conversation on the funding of the schools and the arts. I have the privilege of serving on the Appropriations Committee, so I know all too well what it takes to come up with a budget and what the process is that actually either adds or subtracts from these different line items. That said, I'm a big proponent of the arts and the arts and culture programs here in Waterbury. In fact, to that end, I will be looking for, personally, I will be looking for more funding because I now have an additional 6 more groups that are looking for funding here in Waterbury expanding the arts and theater. In fact, they're looking to actually start up a couple black box theaters here in Waterbury. So to that end, I'm a big proponent of the arts, and I will be looking to, from my end, to fight for more funds for the Great Waterbury region.
This is great. I feel like I'm getting news tips too. I'm getting double duty here.
Mhm.
What, anybody else? What else? Who else would like to jump in on this topic of state funding?
I could jump in for a second, Ann. So thank you for the question. And I sit here and I think about the arts and the impact it has, right, on all of our communities. And we know that, the arts, bring a better educational experience to our communities. They bring a better social experience to our communities. And they also have an economic value to our communities. And I think making sure that, theaters like the Palace Theater, who it really is the hub of downtown Waterbury, and a lot of merchants rely on people using the Palace Theater. So we certainly have to make sure that we're funding our local theaters the way we should be. And, we should certainly be looking at public-private partnerships and, scouring through our state budget to see where we can find savings to allocate more revenue, to the arts and our local theaters. And I'm certainly committed to do that.
And before
Anybody
we
else?
move on, I would just like, yeah, can you hear me?
Sure.
All right, I'm sorry, my internet is all spotty. They're working on the poles in my town, and so I'm like losing service in and out, so I'm sorry. John was on with me earlier and I got cut off right in the middle of a good statement. So I also think that we really need to look at the investment that we have made in tourism and directly take some of those dollars and send them directly back to the arts, because we recognize too that arts does create tourism. And a lot of times we see folks that come in strictly for that. They're going to see a show, they're going to go to an art gallery, whatever that might be. And I think that we need to make sure that a high percentage of what is received from tourism in the state goes back to the arts, because we know that $1 in and $7 out. And it's really important that we continue to take that flow. And if we don't, we're going to see the arts shrink. And we know that arts develop communities. And we have an arts council in town, and we're a designated art community. And that brings artists here, that brings people here, and that gets traffic on the ground. So I think we need to look at how we redirect those tourism dollars.
Well, actually, let me jump in here, because Michelle, you've actually touched on a question that I'd like to ask everybody. And exactly that. Historically in Connecticut, tourism and marketing and the arts are handled differently and separately as they're trying to debate their funding. And often tourism historically gets a little more money than the arts, even though the arts is a big part of Connecticut tourism. So, Michelle just said, hey, maybe we need to spend some of that money around. Here's the question. Do you guys believe that this separation of how we look at funding for arts and tourism, what's the point of that? And would you consider combining those two things as you're trying to figure out how to fund both arts, tourism, and marketing, which obviously are very related?
Well, I'll take that. I think one thing, first of all, I would want to keep those together, or have those together, because has been pointed out a few times, tourism, what attracts a community to a lot of people is the art that they have there. So people like to go visit that community. I mean, I think of the Sistine Chapel. Would people go visit the Sistine Chapel without Michelangelo's artwork there? Sometimes the art is what draws people. Not just does it draw people, to come to the restaurants then that are nearby the museum or the exhibit or the event that's there, but also it might compel people to relocate to those towns, to move into those neighborhoods. So yeah, I do think should be all together, because a lot of what draws people to a community for the first time might be a festival or exhibit or show that's happening in that town. And as they experience that town or city for the first time, they may say, wow, this is a pretty nice place. And that may lead to them continuing to come there, how tourism normally works. So I do think combining those two elements is really key, because they do really work in tandem, and they help grow communities too.
I see some hands up. Matt, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm going to slightly disagree with my esteemed colleague, Mr. Desmarais, and mention that I think in some ways it's helpful to have the line items potentially because they're each other and one can inform the other, but in terms of how they actually look and their perspectives, tourism tends to look outward. How can we draw people here to come see what's awesome about here, where the arts tend to look in, how can we make our communities thrive places, and what ways can we do that? So the arts tend to be ways that we can make our communities desirable. We get to say that we have the Sistine Chapel. We don't just get to go visit it. So we're the ones who live with the Sistine Chapel all the time, that sort of thing. It helps our community get the kind of identity that something like Venice would have, or something like Northwest Connecticut has. We have a lot of people who are in the arts for full-time jobs, directors, actors, key grips, whatever it happens to be. They are working and living here in the Northwest corner. I was knocking on doors in Morris, and the guy that we went up to is one of the volunteer firemen. He works in sound for Hollywood films. Basically, he has to essentially telecommute and fully commute because broadband in the area is not significant enough for him to be able to do it at home, but he could basically do it at home. If we can get ways to make the arts and tourism, as well as some of the infrastructure things go on, then all three of those potentially could feed into each other, and we can actually have thriving communities. So I agree with Jeff in that we shouldn't necessarily make everything a component and then just look at specifically as a component. But we need to raise operations as there and communicating. Ultimately, that's kind of the theme of my campaign from the beginning, is communication. The only way this whole thing is going to work, whether it's arts, whether it's politics, whether it's relationships, family, community, anything else. The only way it works, talk to each other, not shout at each other, not shout each other down, not scream at each other, and certainly not call names. Just communicate. That's
Wow,
what we've
we're
got.
getting life advice.
Yeah, that's right.
We're getting life advice.
Yeah, I bring my soapbox with me. It's portable. It just goes right in my pocket here.
How about Ron?
Yeah,
Your hand up.
Sure. So I would say that we look at both revenue streams, right? And if there's a way to fund, our local theaters, and the art industry more efficiently, if there's a way to do that by splitting them, I'll be okay with that. But I really think it's important as possible.
Anybody else want to jump in on tourism, or you are just setting me up so well?
Just real quick.
You want to jump in there?
Yeah, just really quickly, and it historically it was all combined, regardless of the revenue factor. Representative Napoli brings up a very interesting point of where the revenue will be coming in from. But it used to be the Northwest Arts, Culture, and Tourism District. It was a nice little district, and then there were so many in the state, they decided to combine them, and then it got unwieldy. So it's funny how it went through this whole cycle. I just wanted to bring that up, like historically, that they were kind of together that way, naturally. But the revenue stream is something that we should look into, because there is that hotel surcharge, car rental surcharge that can be
Thank you. And one more on tourism. I see your hand up. No? All right. Well, we're gonna. You guys are making my job so easy today, because you keep setting me up. I love this. I could have just come in here and let you go wild. This is really, and so you have referred to this. Let's talk. There's no question, and plenty of studies about arts as an economic driver. The National Endowment of the Arts, Office of Research and Analysis, and its Bureau of Economic Analysis say that in 2020, And 3% of our gross state product also employed 49,159 workers with wages and benefits totaling more than 5.1 billion statewide. And certainly if you talk to the Palace, or you talk to the Warner, or you talk to the Opera House, everybody knows, they've all had studies on how much people spend. You show up for a show, you spend money in that town. So there's no question that there's a link between arts and economics. But often in our towns and our cities, when you sit down and start talking about economic development, it's the mayor, it's political leaders, it's developers. You don't often see arts leaders involved in that. So, you know, their organizations can help drive development. Their need for infrastructure, a hotel or better internet or whatever, could help develop a community. Would you find a way, or do you think it's worthy to incorporate discussions about infrastructure or transportation or housing? And if you believe that's a worthy idea, how would you do it?
I'll start. I think that's the only way to get it done. I think if we govern silos and make decisions for other folks without hearing for everybody, then we just go backwards and we don't move forwards. And we recognize that if we're trying to develop downtown or Main Street, if you will, the only way to do that is for folks that are on Main. So it's very easy to sit behind a desk and sit. So we'd be very excited if we did hear from them. And it's able for those to say, hey, look, you know, we need affordable, but we can only pay this. We all, you know, we know that, you know, the old phrase of the starving artist. We need to ensure that that phrase goes away. People deserve to live in an affordable place. And that does not mean, you know, low income housing. That means affordable housing. That means a place that somebody can live in that they can be proud of and hold their head high and say, this is where I'm at. And oftentimes artists like to live and work in the same communities and have a very short commute. And most of the artists that I know burn the midnight oil and sometimes sleep during the day. So, you know, at the end of the day, we must work together and listen to those that are on the ground. It makes us better policymakers for it.
Thank
I like
you.
to.
How about Mr.
Thank you,
Reyes?
Em.
Yep.
Yeah, but I like to chime in. I think Representative Cook is right on the right track. Without that back and forth communication and dialogue, we're just both fishing in an open dialogue back and forth, fruitful. Hang on one second, I'm getting a phone call. Hang on. Yeah, sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay.
But what happens, where I was going with the comment was basically that that's why we have in appropriations hearing and we have in the commerce hearing, we want the public to come in and speak. The public speaking portion of all our committees is where a lot of us actually learn a lot more than just elevator speech. We actually dig into the details. That's why those testimonies are so important. And I always ask people that are interested in whatever it is that they're interested in to not just tell me, but to also come in and actually testify in person.
Wow, that's fantastic. Everybody in Connecticut, listen, you just got an open invitation to speak up in Hartford. That's so important. I hope they take you up on it.
Thank you.
All right, jump on in. We got a lot of hands up. How about Mr. Napoli?
Sure. So again, thank you for the question. And I think that, you know, I look at all of our downtowns, right? Whether it's Thomaston or Torrington or Waterbury, and, you know, the arts is such a economic pull factor, right? And I think that what you point out, and that, you know, having professionals from the art in these conversations when we're doing these master plans for economic development and meeting with developers, right? Like that kind of gets lost, you know, and I think there should be a way where they should certainly have a seat at the table, right? Certainly with the Chamber of Commerce here in Waterbury, who does a great job, and really telling us what we have to bring back for them to be successful. So, the state delegation has worked really hard with our local mayor and our local officials to, really put a lot of capital into downtown Waterbury, right? And of course, that's going to help the Mattuck Museum and, as I said earlier, the Palace Theater. So making sure that people in the arts are part of those economic development conversations is going to be really important.
How about Mr. Piscopo? I'm just bouncing around the board here, all sorts of hands.
Thank you, Ann, and it's good follow-up on Representative Napoli. So, because I was at the chamber with some of, I know Michelle was there this morning at 8 o'clock this morning. The chamber did pop into my mind while you were asking your question. Our Northwest Corner Chamber and our Northwest Connecticut Chamber and our Greater Waterbury Chambers work very, very well, bringing those nonprofits, the arts in, and giving them a full and fair voice. There's not a chamber event we go to where arts and culture is not brought up as a legitimate question and thing. So I just wanted to bring that up also. Thank you.
I do have to jump in and say, actually, thank you to you candidates, because I know this is not your only appearance of the day. This is the hot and heavy season, right? We're in the big rush to November. So we really appreciate your time this afternoon, because I know a lot of you are going probably 24/7 right about now. How about Matt? Is that a hand up?
It absolutely is, and thank you. So I just want to add one thing, which is that in some ways we also have to flip the script a little bit, where if we, as people who are on the ground, I haven't been elected yet, so I'm going to throw myself into that group as well. People who are holding our leaders accountable, we need to see, if we see an economic development commission in our local municipality that doesn't have any artists on it or doesn't have anything that has to do with the arts or anything, then we need to hold our leaders accountable and say to them, look, we need to put people on. If we're in the arts and we have some extra team to run for those positions, we can't just get out of it and say, well, nobody asked me to do it. We have an obligation around to jump into that as well. I see that, most of the towns in my district now have, I think, some sort of economic development and that's been appointed to the town. Those are the ways we can get involved and we can talk. So it's not just that the arts are not just a place to be creative, they're a place to be communal.
Did I miss anybody?
Just that are more or less developing your communities. So if you're going to be looking at what economic development really means, you got to find out what the full broad definition of that is. It's not just building a new Wendy's. It's finding out the character of your town, the character of your city, the character of your downtown, and what you want there. The arts community is a big influence, a big voice in what that should be.
This is a random, silly thought that just popped into my head. We should get artists involved as they try to figure out how to fix the mix master. Let's change topics. Let's change topics a little bit. Connecticut has not had an arts education specialist at the State Department of Education since 2016. Which 2016, wow, that feels like a long time ago now, doesn't it? Pre-pandemic, it feels like a different century after going through all that pandemic stuff. So 2016, when the last specialist left and they did not refill this position, which is intended to assure that state and national arts education standards are consistently implemented in all Connecticut school districts, especially those in under-resourced communities, where students' access to the arts may be limited compared to more affluent communities. Would you support refilling the arts education specialist? And if not, why not?
Well, if nobody minds, I guess I'll go. Yes, I do support that for the reasons stated, why that position existed. I have a lot of concerns about arts education in our schools, particularly going forward. We've seen some hostility towards our teachers who are trying to teach just non-art related subjects, but in particular arts related subjects, to allow them to feel comfortable, allowing students to find their inner voice. And so I think by having somewhere within the state in this particular role, being able to work towards that end, to be able to facilitate arts education within our schools is really important. I know, and I've had these discussions with a lot of teachers that are concerned about whether or not they're going to be under fire for teaching about not just, in terms of art as in painting or what have you, but just music or in case of English classes, books. There's a lot of concern about what could happen. There seems to be a bit of a persecution going on in that area. From my perspective, we've seen an increase nationwide, maybe not specifically in Connecticut, though that's concern could overflow, a banning of books. I've always maintained that book banning and book burning is never done by the good guys. It's always the bad guys who do that. We want to be encouraging arts education. We want to be encouraging students to find their inner self-expression and find their true self. Art is a road to do that, and it helps them immensely through a lot of difficulties, even personal difficulties they may be having at home. I think that a role like the one mentioned that we haven't had since 2016 should be back in place so that we can help facilitate that through our school districts. But I'm very concerned about how our school districts are facing increased pressure from parent groups and from outside political sources in terms of being able to feel comfortable teaching subject matter.
Let's work our way around the board. Michelle, what do you think about this position?
Why it was,
think-
it has not been filled?
It has not been filled, yeah. Since
I
2016.
know, do you know why?
I
Do you know why the
believe
person
that
left and why it wasn't refilled?
You know what? I don't know why the person left, but I do believe it was just a question of funding at the time.
So you don't know if we removed the position or the person evacuated the position and we didn't refill it?
That's my understanding, is that it's never been refilled.
Okay, I mean, I'm all about refilling it. I would just be curious as to why it's been vacated for so long. Is it just because we haven't filled it? Is it because we aren't looking for an applicant? Or did that position get rolled into something else? I've sat on the education committee for 14 years, and this is not an ask that I've ever had. So I'm intrigued by the ask, and I appreciate it, and I look forward to having the conversation further. I think it's vitally important. And we know that folks with a variety of different needs, arts really gets into your brain and helps you detract from some of the stressors and helps you focus better. And I think it's vitally important. It could truly see an overall change, not only for our students, but also to help our educators educate our students and calm them down. So I think it's important, and I'd like to have the continued conversation.
I appreciate and love your thought process. If you ever decide to quit politics, maybe you can come be a reporter. Good questions. Let's keep going. Let's keep going around the board. How about, I feel like I'm at a game show here. You guys look so goofy, like all on the screen. I feel like I'm at a game show. How about Mr. Piscopo?
Well, yeah, like Michelle, I wasn't aware that there was a position or that it was not being filled. I would like to see the job description of that and see what their mission was. I'm a strong believer in arts and music education in the school systems. And it seems to be the first budget cut that comes across when times get tight. So I have a sister-in-law that works in an affluent community, and she went from doing just elementary school to elementary, middle school, then elementary, middle, high school, the one arts teacher and music teacher.
Wow.
All three of those systems for that whole education system of that town. And you mentioned those that are impoverished that are having trouble. That seems to be Even our more affluent towns are suffering from that. So I do support that education system. I would just like to, like Michelle, look into this position a little more broadly and see what's going on, why it hasn't been filled, and what the description was in the first place. Thank you.
I think it just wasn't filled. I think it was a hiring freeze, and then it just, maybe it got lost in the weeds. I don't know, maybe right now, just by asking this question, we've ignited hope for people who want this back in the system. That's interesting. Let's keep going. How about Matt?
Quickly popping in, Richard has left some input in the chat on that position, a little bit more information.
Yeah, I was going to draw attention to that, actually. I saw him nodding along when Michelle was speaking that he had apparently some information as this.
Thanks, Richard.
Yeah. It looks like the person left for another position and there's a hiring freeze as a result of all of that. So definitely it sounds like some light is being shown on this particular issue. I would support the issue. Just to comment quickly on something that Mr. Piscopo said. I think he's totally right that in times of economic crisis, whatever it happens to be, whether it's COVID or something else, the arts tend to be the first thing that we consider extraneous. It's the first thing that we consider unimportant. And it tends to get cut, they tend to get cut almost immediately. And I think we need to revisit that concept where instead of having arts be something that's considered a luxury or a frivolity, we need to recognize that it's essential, the way that we're talking now, to the core of what we are as people, the core of what we are as communities, and stop using arts funding as our first means of slashing whatever budgets we have because we were trying to put a camel through the eye of a needle. We need to, if there are things that need to be cut, we need to all start recognizing those hits are valuable, but arts shouldn't necessarily be the first front line. Typically, they don't get as much funding as a whole bunch of other places, so I don't know why they're considered as big. It's kind of like sitting on my couch as long as I get my Corvette for $1,000 a month. We need to make sure that we're actually looking at the budget in ways that don't necessarily impede on arts as our first line.
How about Mr. Reyes? What do you say?
Thank you, Ann. My comment on that is just like everything else. If what gets advocated for usually gets the attention. So if the community wants this particular position to be filled, they should be openly advocating for it. And again, I go back to by sending testimony and sending letters to the governor and to the appropriations committee that you want this position filled, and for the reasons that you deem it's important. If you're asking me if it's important, I would say yes. I would like to see a regional approach to this type of thinking, so that we're not redundant throughout the state. But I believe that advocacy can get this position filled rather quickly.
I gotta say, I love how many times you're finding ways to tell people to get themselves in gear. We're having a little rally here. I like that. How about Mr. Napoli?
Yeah, so thank you. I would certainly support looking at refunding the position, but I also just want to share an experience with you all. For those of you who don't know, I'm also a high school history teacher, and I got called to the principal's office one day, and I walked in the principal's office, and sitting down was my building principal, Tom Shute and Marie Galbraith. And they said to me, you are going to run an after-school program for at-risk kids called Teen Idol. Now, I was a coach. I was never in theater before, so you guys probably know what my response was. Anyway, fast forward, I ended up doing that for about 4.5 years. And you're spot on, by the way, about Marie. And my time with her was almost like, it was like an education with her. But in any event, I got to see and be on the front lines, to see what it was like for our students to be on the stage of Wilby High School with the lights on. And every day they would come after school and do homework for about a half hour. And then, Tom Shute and Marie and other performers would come in and help them prepare for their theater productions. And again, at a time when we're trying to talk about ways, right, to keep kids off the streets, right, and engage in programs like this, I couldn't think of a more important position to look at, right? So I would certainly support it, just based on my own experiences here in Waterbury, and again, I've seen my students flourish with this. So thank you.
Did you ever get the chance to get yourself on stage when that was going on?
I was the guy who worked backstage and built all the prompts.
Coach doesn't go on stage, right? I'm trying to think of Tom Shoot and Marie together. I never got to see that. I bet they were a powerful force, those two.
Every day was amazing.
Yeah, I believe it. All right, let's get to some more questions before we have to call it quits. You know, we started talking about funding. Let's talk about a different issue with funding in the arts. This is a COVID question, the evil virus, right? COVID-19 hit our arts organizations hard. You know, if you have a mandatory shutdown and you have to close, you can't, you know, do your work. And even now, people are just getting used to get back together, you know, just getting used to it. So we're hoping and waiting to see if in the arts and everywhere else, we can get back to, you know, just regular old life. Federal funding has made a huge contribution to keeping local arts organizations going. $52 million across Connecticut in federal funding. You know, this year, for example, that's $87,000 at the Warner in Torrington. The Palace in the past 2 years has gotten $618,000 in federal money that it otherwise would not have had. You know, this is money that lets the lights on, that pays employees, that's stuff they need. That money's going to run out. And whether or not audiences return to post-pandemic levels or not, that federal money is not going to last. What do you say to arts organizations facing this federal funding loss, especially when state funding has been flat? How much responsibility does the state of Connecticut have to help finance arts groups? How about Mr. Reyes?
Thank you, Ann, for the question. The state of Connecticut is right now a major funding stream for a lot of the arts in the state of Connecticut, and I don't see where they're going to stop any of the funding or be cutting any of the funding in the near future. That said, I would still argue that there are still plenty of funds available for different theater groups and arts and performance groups to be able to tap into. I don't think that we're not anywhere near the well being empty on any of these funds right now. I would say that, and I'm saying near future, maybe in the next 2 to 3 years, I think that we're going to be in good shape. Going forward beyond that is a whole nother question. But I, haven't been looking at budgets and having had the luxury of sitting in appropriations where you're going through every line item with a fine tooth comb, and I don't see where the arts are going to be hurt in the near future in the next 2-3 years. I don't see it.
How about who else wants to jump in? How about Mr. Napoli waving his hand?
Thank you. And you're right. So a $51 million investment was made this year. And I want to say in fiscal year 23, it's going to be about 35 million. Those are two significant investments. But of course, in those out years, right? There's at this point right now, there's no guarantee. So look, I mean, I think we have a lot of work to do. And I think we've got to look at our budgeting process, right? And try to find a revenue stream that certainly doesn't impede our taxpayers and residents, and make sure that our theaters get the appropriate funding that they need, and look, I mean, I'll tell you, and I apologize, I'm speaking about Waterbury a lot, but the downtown merchants are so relying on the Palace Theater, and so we've got to make sure that they're getting the resources they need to keep the doors open, and of course the great production shows going. So
how about Jeff?
Well, I would actually echo what both Ron and Jerry said, that I think that we have to we have to look at it from an economic standpoint, as well as Ron mentioned about downtown Waterbury being very dependent on the Palace Theater, and I'm sure it's the same thing with Torrington with the Warner Theater, and it's even the same with the smaller theaters in some of our smaller towns. There's an economic reason to do it, if nothing else. If that doesn't compel some legislators to increase funding, then I don't know what would. We also kind of view it, though, those of us that care about the arts, beyond its economic impact, its intrinsic value to a community, its intrinsic value to people in general. We see the importance of it, and I do think we need to make sure that we increase the funding so that these different organizations don't find themselves in a real financial crunch once the federal dollars start to dissipate. So it's a practical decision to be able to make based on economic need, but also based on the cultural need as well.
How about Mr. Piscopo?
Thank you. I think yeah, we have to brace for that money going away. I think that's just prudent. But I think that we have to have some faith in our public. I think the people are coming back to the shows. The Thomaston Opera House, we had every other row taken out, for social distancing and whatever, and it's kind of nice. It was much more comfortable in the orchestra.
You get a little more leg.
But so many people were starting to come back and wanting to see our shows that we were slowly bringing the rows back. So I think that people want to come to these, and they will, and hopefully we'll make up for it. The Landmark Community Theater is, which runs the Thomaston Opera House, has operated in the black since its inception. So very, very proud of that, and it's going on.
Good for them.
Yeah, it's going on about 11 years now, and so it's not much in the black, but we do stay there. We were not in the red, but I think that's a good, just faith in our public coming back to our shows will determine a lot.
There's always that group out there that says, why the heck should they get funding? Their businesses, why don't they just go? And so you're saying, the arts lovers and the people who want a nice night out are going to come through and enjoy getting back out and also help them with their budgets.
Yeah, it's something like right in the middle of any one of our towns. If you go to Torrington when there's a Warner event, the restaurants are packed, and same with Waterbury. It's just you don't do takeout on a theater night. You're staying home.
You got that performance night vibe. How about Michelle?
Yeah, John, I'm laughing at what takeout I would take into the Warner and be able to sneak it in. I think I'd get in trouble. I think this is a good question. It kind of goes back to what I had started the conversation with about the investment and how we bring state dollars and redirect them, and using the tourism money, because we know that the dollars that we've been gifted during a tragic time of a pandemic will definitely go away. We know that it's not sustainable. And I think the one thing that we often do as organizations is rely on the state to fill our shortfalls. And then that becomes a trickle-down effect of problems. The other thing I think is vitally important is those theaters or other arts type organizations that have been creative and thinking out of the box and using their facility for more than just a performance on a stage. Le Warner has classes. They teach additional day for sure, building more after hours during the day and other times when you don't have the main stage full. I think that helps to offset a budget that we often let sit idle. But that's kind of where I'm going. I think I'm frozen again.
You kind of walked out and came back, but I think we got the point about having organizations that are branching out and offering different things. The Warner does classes. We see stuff at the Palace like their speaker series. That's a whole nother way to use that venue. That's pretty popular. Who am I missing? Matt?
Well, I'm not sure you're missing me all that much, but I'll go ahead and go. So the I think one of the problems with the way that we view economic funding, both from a federal and state level, is that we think that once we get funding, we just can move on to the next thing. And we think now it's a line item. We talk about it in terms of a line item and we move on. And in 2 years, we talk about it all again. These are more dynamic issues and more dynamic problems. So COVID's been something that was unprecedented, and we need to be flexible in some ways, figuring out how we're going to solve the issues that COVID has left us. We're now in the cleanup phase in many ways. Of trying to figure that. So what does that look like? How does it look? Are we happy with our response? Are we unhappy with it? That leads into what Representative Reyes was talking about in terms of the people from the community telling us what they experienced. For all of us that are up here running for office to try to hit a target in terms of how this solution needs to happen, ignores really where everybody needs to be. We all need to be talking about this. And I think that you guys have great ideas in terms of how we can fill those gaps. I agree with what people have been saying in terms of the fact that it's going to be a combination of those businesses themselves or those entities themselves from the arts being able to create their own funding, as well as a funding from the state. But part of what the arts that makes the arts different from virtually any other entity on the planet is, as a creative entity, the arts are oftentimes trying to tell society things that it doesn't like, not just things that it does like. And if we're waiting for the arts to be able to really do what it does, and then saying, but if you don't do what we like, we're going to cut funding, or if you decide to do things that we don't really want to hear, we're going to not fund you anymore. That eliminates the whole creative process and the whole imaginative process of what the arts can bring to us. So there needs to be a certain amount of funding that we are pretty much going to guarantee regardless, and that we know as a community that sometimes these artists are going to say things that we don't agree with, that we don't like. They're going to present things that are going to challenge our thinking. They're going to present things that challenge our history, our tradition, the way that we've done things. And we have to allow that to happen. And quite frankly, if we want to figure new ways to solve problems like COVID, if something like that happens again, the arts are going to be the place that are going to start us talking in a different way, talking in different terms, talking in different narratives. And we have to allow them the funding to do that.
That's an interesting perspective, actually, that the arts can sometimes tell us stuff we don't want to hear. And that everybody's reinventing themselves after COVID. I feel parallels to the newspaper industry, which is reinventing itself and often tells people things they don't want to hear.
One more quick question.
We're going to do one more quick question. Why don't we, if we do them fast, maybe we can do two really fast. Here's one more question that's kind of money related. Let's see how fast we can answer it, and maybe we'll squeeze in one more. If in his bid for re-election, Governor Ned Lamont has touted many times state surpluses under his leadership, would you support using any of those state surplus funding to help fund the arts?
I can
Matt,
just
how
jump
about
in here real quick. Sure. I'm on a roll. The answer I will say very quickly is a lawyerly maybe. So the surplus stuff I think is a real nice potential apple for us to look at, but it can be just as seductive as a lot of things. And we have to be cautious about just burning through all the savings that we have in the event that another COVID hits. The rainy day fund is there for a reason. It's for rainy days, and we shouldn't necessarily be using that in the way that I wouldn't use a savings account as just a way to find out, oh, good, now I can go buy the things I've always wanted to. So the answer is maybe, if it's something that I think it would be, it's gone through the process to find out whether it's appropriate. But
it's a hard maybe. How about Mr.
Hard maybe.
Piscopo?
Well, the short answer is yes. After the proper vetting that Matt had brought up, yes, of course, it is surplus. The rainy day fund is something a little different that we keep over on in another pocket, if you will. And so yes, with the current surplus, a good prudent look at things and vetting I would be in favor of.
That's a vetting and a yes. How about Mr. Reyes?
My simple answer would be, in a perfect world, yes, I would consider increasing the funding. But I will also remind everybody that's watching and listening that we do have a spending cap that, and we do have a cap that we are not supposed to exceed legally. So I would say that I will give you a strong maybe, Ben, based on the vetting and the current needs of the calendar year.
How about Mr. Napoli?
Yeah, so I certainly think it's something to look at, have a conversation about. But a majority of the surplus went to pay down our unfunded pension liabilities, which I think is really, really important. And I wouldn't really want to deviate from that. But if there's certainly a way to look at it and still do both, then I would strongly support that. But ultimately, we certainly have to find a viable revenue stream that funds the arts the way we should.
How about Jeff?
Well, I'm going to come up with a completely unoriginal thought and agree with what everyone has said so far. It has to, I have no opposition whatsoever to taking from the surplus. In fact, if that's where we can do it from, absolutely, because it's something sorely needed. But I would agree with Mr. Napoli on the fact that it would be better to try to find it through a different revenue stream through the normal budget process or normal budget than to have to worry about it having to come from the surplus, because as has been mentioned, paying down that servicing debt is really important, and that could actually allow for more funding as we go, because it would free up funds in the future.
And Michelle?
Hoping that my internet stays good. I think the devils are in the details, and we have a surplus, but at the same time, everybody's buying for a piece of that surplus. And at the end of the day, that puts us in the exact same position as the COVID dollars. It's going to be a one-time expenditure and doesn't resolve our problems. So I think that we have to look at long-time, solid funding, and not these temporary, type situation. And the other situation that I think that we cannot ignore, the fact that we may be looking at recession, and we don't know what happens. And so if that does, we cannot afford to be without dollars and cents. I mean, our state in theory is in great place right now. We're down in surplus. I mean, if the recession hits and the bottom falls out again, we need to be protected. So I'm cautiously optimistic about the fact that will happen. But I also have seen our state over the last 14 years, and I know that John has been in the same position for many years longer than I, that we've seen good times and bad times in our state. I don't want to promise things not guaranteed what the future's like. So as much as I support the arts and figuring out a way to fund it, I'm very cautious about these one-time thing streams, and then built up, and then we find ourselves in a really bad position again. So yes, I support, but how that happens is something totally different.
And how about Mr. Reyes? Surplus in the arts. Did you answer? Oh, you answered. See, I'm getting goony. It's tired. So we could squeeze in maybe one really quick question, but you got to be quick. During the course of today, which has been a great conversation, thank you very much. It's very interesting. During the pandemic especially, and in the course of our conversation, we've had several mentions of how the arts can help you with stress, or it can help you feel better, or it can help you feel hopeful. Can any of you share a moment that you have seen in your community where that's been the case? And how might that influence you if you are in Hartford making decisions? Mr. Reyes.
I'll go. Do you want me to go?
Sorry, Miss Ann, did you call me?
Yeah, I did.
Thank you. So
Share a moment.
what I will tell you is that even through the pandemic, the arts and cultural, especially on the smaller scale, did continue here in the city of Waterbury. And since, and I'm going to call this 2022, just barely after the pandemic, while we're still in it, in Waterbury alone, We've seen the city theater youth thrive through that and been able to put on small shows. The Lace group on Grand Street, which is a brand new organization, which is a part of the Hispanic Coalition, is going to brace itself to put on some more shows. And there's a group that's going around trying to open up a black box theater. So I would say, in light of everything that we've been through in the pandemic, the arts are still alive and well, especially in the small scale here in the city of Waterbury, and we will continue to support them.
How about Mr. Piscopo?
Thank you, and as quick as I could be, on Sundays, the Thomaston Opera House offers a group rate, if you will, to like our convalescent homes, our rehabilitation centers, and
Oh, that's nice.
yeah, it's great. And we had Mary Poppins running one time, and you never know what their week's like. Those people that live in those facilities, and one of the older women came out with her walker, and she was singing one of the Mary Poppins tunes, and it
Oh, that's awesome.
just did my heart and soul very, very well, and that kind of summed it up for me.
I can see it. I can hear it. How about Matt?
So during the pandemic, and it may have been the nuts and bolts of this may be in place before the pandemic, but it actually started happening during the pandemic. A group of people went out and repurchased the Bantam Cinema and has reopened it. And it is now holding, I believe, weekly events. They're doing quite a bit of work through there, a lot of different community events that I personally attended one that was for It's a Wonderful Life, and it was 40s dress, and it was really classy. Just the way that these events are taking place in a film environment, not necessarily in a straight up, live theater environment. So those types of things are fantastic. And I, in terms of giving hope to the community, that's it. That's our place. That's our town. That's something that's happening from the ground up.
It's a Wonderful Life. It's almost that time of year again.
I know, right?
How about Jeff?
Well, yeah, I see, we've seen a return since the pandemic of arts festivals in various places from Southbury. We've seen at the Bethlehem Fair, we saw art exhibitions there as well. My story about as far as like community and art and the importance of it is really a quick little personal story. My mother-in-law was a painter. She painted the watercolors, and she had her work often exhibited and for sale at different art exhibitions in the Northeast for a number of years. She passed away in 2018, and she was a really vibrant, wonderful person. Everybody who would talk to her would sort of get that joy of life right from her. And like I said, unfortunately, she passed away, but we and her other children have some of her paintings hanging in our house. And the thing is that whenever we think of her, she's always seems to be there for us. And so I think the power of art in a community is reflected in something like that, where it isn't just something where it's how the community come together, which is something very important, but what it says to each and every one of us. So that art is something that transcends time, and it transcends death even. It's something that is a part of all of us. So whenever we go through struggles, whether as a community or as individuals, we can look at something, be reminded of something beautiful and wonderful that maybe was once there, but it's still there and it's in a different form. So I think that for me, that's something that art says to not just a community, but to us individually as well.
I'm feeling very philosophical right now. How about Mr. Napoli?
Thank you. So what we did during the pandemic in our district and with the community groups, especially Bunker Hill, is recognizing that art is fundamental to humanity, right? So we planned a lot of concerts in Bunker Hill Park, and this year we actually had about 6 concerts in the park. And I'll tell you, it brings people from all over the neighborhood together. You see people walking in with their families and their dogs and their fold-up chairs, right? And they're sharing conversations and food, and during intermission, everyone is talking, and really, music is bringing people together, making them feel good. And there's also people who live in the area, right, who who can enjoy the music from their porches and their balconies. So, I think doing more of that, bringing the arts directly to our neighborhood has a significant impact on how we all think about art and how we view art and how important art is. Because during testing times, when things are really difficult, art is going to be one of the only factors that bring us all together.
Oh, and we certainly could use that in the country, right? We all need to get together. Okay, Michelle, you're up.
Thank you. I think that one, the music and the arts really helped save some of our residents in our nursing homes when they were isolated, or for that matter, anybody that was isolated. They were able to do things together on Zoom. We saw musicians be creative and out of the box and partner with people that they might have never partnered with before. And people were taking risks, and people were having karaoke nights, and they were doing wine and paint parties, but they were doing it all on Zoom and being creative. But I think it's also important, and I want to kind of piggyback on what Ron's talking about. In Torrington, we've always done concert in the parks. And one of the things that we had during the pandemic and still beyond is the ability to be outside, spread out, but still enjoy each other's company in a creative way. And I have seen more turnout in our concerts in the park or our festivals than I've seen in a very, very long time. And the partnerships do not, again, it's not about the silos, but it's about working together. So you see different people at our Strawberry Festival, you see different folks at our concerts in the park. And then I cannot get off this call without
Uh-oh. Poor Michelle. She's going to throw her phone down.
And there it goes again. I think board 5 points all hard. I just can't thank everybody enough for keeping us sane during a rough couple of years.
It was a rough couple of years, and I completely get it why more people are coming out to the parks and the concerts outside, and there's just something about that experience that does bring everybody together. So listen, this has been a fabulous conversation. I really appreciate and everybody at both versions of the Arts Councils really appreciate it. And I really hope that you guys have made some points that stick with voters. And I really, really hope that whether they're voting for the arts or any other reason, that everybody just gets out on November 8th, because that's so important. Thank you so much for joining us, you guys. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much for having us.
Thank you very much.